everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of Way of Light. I've worked at the temple for about the past 10 years now, and I can really attest to the quality of the work that they do. Predominantly, they're working with the plant medicine ayahuasca, working in the Shipibo tradition. They run 12-day ceremonies or 12-day workshops in which they have 6 ceremonies, working with 4 different healers, doctors, curanderos. They work with 2 to 3 facilitators, which is kind of like the bridge between the guests that come down and the Shipibo doctors. They have yoga classes. They work with Shipibo massage people, bone doctors. There's an amazing integration team, a team that works with people before they come down. So it's really just an amazing environment to go really deeply into this work. So if you're interested in working with ayahuasca on a really deep and profound level, it's an amazing place to go. Unfortunately, they've been closed since, I believe, March of 2020 due to the pandemic, but they're scheduled to reopen in August of 2021. So if you'd like more information about them, you can check out their website at templeofthewayoflight.org. Also, myself and my colleague Marav Artsy are running dietas, which is one of the traditional ways to really go deeply and learn experientially from these plants. Working in the tradition we were trained in, predominantly working with tobacco and trees. We're continuing to run diets. Probably when this comes out, the next one will be in September here in the Sacred Valley of Peru, and then most likely will also be in Egypt in October. And if you'd like more information on that, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org and my friend and colleague Marav's site at tobaccodiets.com. I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes as well. This episode, I sat down with my friend Will Pye. Will and I actually met when I first came to the Amazon, probably about 10 years ago or so now. We were in the same workshop together. And right away, I kind of knew we had a really beautiful connection. We would sit in the dining hall often and talk and catch up. And I just found his mind very interesting and very open and intriguing. And we would have some really lovely conversations. I was on Will's podcast probably a year and a half ago or so now. He's got a really good podcast. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So I thought it'd be really beautiful to have him on. He's a fascinating guy. He's been, since a very young age, very interested in spirituality, different paths and practices, working with different plant medicines. And at a certain point, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and that had a very big impact on his life and led to a lot of the work he's doing. He's written a couple books. He's an author, a speaker, podcaster. He's done a lot of things, and he's a really beautiful human being, and he has a lot to share. This podcast, I think, was very deeply philosophical in a way. We spoke about a lot of subjects, and he has a lot to share. So I think you guys will all get a lot out of this episode. As always, if you're able to help to support the podcast, that's a really big help to me. If you're able to support financially, that's a really big help to help me to continue to make these podcasts. Even a small donation makes a big difference. Patreon is a really good option for as little as $1 a month. You can sign up and subscribe, and it also gives you some really nice added benefits, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. So that's a really big help to me. To all of the people who have done that, thank you very much. I deeply appreciate it. There's also the ability to donate via PayPal, and I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes. If you're not able to do that, simply going on the YouTube channel, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the videos. That's a really big benefit with the algorithms. And then with the audio version, going on Apple Podcasts, also subscribing to the show and leaving a starred rating and a short review. That's a really big help. It may seem like a small thing, but that really helps with the algorithms and getting the show out to a bigger audience. So I think that's it for the introduction. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Will.
I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Well, I guess we're not technically live, but we're recording. I guess that's
Live-ish.
live-ish. Well, it's good to see you, man. Like I said, thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming on. And just as a
Pleasure to be
precursor,
talking with you.
yeah, with this podcast, hopefully I'm not leaving anyone out, but I think it was pretty much you and another friend of mine, Mike from Micadelic Podcast, who kind of gave me the impetus to start this show. I was on your show, I guess about a year ago now, when I was in the jungle during lockdown, and podcasting was something I'd been interested in doing for a while, but the isolation of the jungle, the lack of internet connectivity, and just my workload pretty much prevented me from doing that. But then with the pandemic, I started, and so a big thanks to that is for you of kind of giving me that inspiration. So yeah, just a precursor.
Congratulations for making it happen. It's a great title, by the way, Universe Within. It's
yeah. So I believe we met when I came down to the jungle the first time for a workshop at the Temple of the Way of Light, and I believe we were in the same group. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's I think that's the first time we met, and I just remember sitting at the dining room tables with you, and we had some very interesting, lively, passionate conversations, and I knew, you know, this guy had something, and I also found your story very interesting. So maybe just to start, you can talk a little bit about yourself, whatever comes to mind, just to give the audience a little bit of background about I know it's always a big question, but who is Will Pye?
Yeah, right. The process, it's nice to not have a bio, because often at this point a bio is read, right? And a bio was written golly knows how long ago, and became not quite right pretty soon after that, like in a day or two. So I like, and I'm slightly scared of this prospect of announcing who I am, you know, without due preparation. Now I'm a writer. That's one thing that I have done and kind of like to be associated as. I wrote my first book called Blessed with a Brain Tumor. That was about my experience of being diagnosed with a brain tumor and looking to create health. And then I wrote the Gratitude Prescription after that. So I've been passionate about transformation, and you know, primarily my own, for a long time. I've been obsessed with consciousness and truth, the nature of reality, for a long time. That's really when my education began, was when I left school and university and academia and all that, and was able to actually look into what I was interested in, and find out that there were forms of physics that were really interesting that they weren't talking about at school. Yeah, so I have a podcast as well, so I guess I'm a podcaster. I'm a speaker. I love to work with groups, and you know, I lead retreats and explore gratitude and meditation. Yeah.
So when I met you, I thought it was very fascinating because I believe at that time, and I don't know if that was one of the impetus for coming down to work with ayahuasca, but we were working in an ayahuasca workshop, and I believe at that time you had already been or you had known that you had a brain tumor. I think you had even probably done an operation at that time. Was that, or maybe you were on your way to? I can't remember. That would have been 2012. I think the end of 2012.
Yeah, I don't think I'd had the. I did end up having a surgery, but I don't think I had one then. I held out for a few years. I was sort of looking to see if it was possible to create a reversal or a stabilization without, you know, sort of severe interventions like surgery. but yeah, I did have a conscious craniotomy in December of 2013. So that's a pretty extraordinary experience.
Mm. Yeah, and I remember it was fascinating kind of talking to you about that because I mean, I think so much of life can be a matter of perspective, and I think a lot of people, when something like that happens, there's kind of this heaviness around it, or a negativity of like, you know, why did this happen to me? But I remember it was very fascinating talking to you, and you just had a very positive kind of outlook about it, and you were actually exploring like how this was potentially changing you or opening you in a way.
Mm.
Was that part of the impetus of why you came down to the temple, or was that just the ayahuasca work was a natural progression of this interest you've had in consciousness?
Bit of both. So I'd already worked with Aya previously, just from previous to diagnosis, so just from a curiosity. I actually wrote down on a piece of paper when I was about 11 or 12. It was like a bucket list, though I probably didn't have familiarity with that term at that age. But it was a sort of things I have to do whilst in this body. And again, I probably wouldn't have languaged it quite so poetically. Um, on this list, it was quite short. It said swim with dolphins, take ayahuasca, and have group sex with women from multiple ethnicities, which I think was, you know, if we look at the progression of civil rights and so on, I think there was a really deep archetypal impulse in that to bring together all beings. But
That's
yeah, so
amazing you had
there
heard of
was
ayahuasca at such a young age.
right, yeah, because I had my culture was telling me things about substances, um, and there was no voice of authority or truth. So I had parents and teachers telling me things that weren't true. I knew were not true. Like, where can you get it for that much? You know, wow, that's a great deal. um, and so I was very curious to find out about the truth behind these substances and whether they were harmful, and the broader context. And so I started to read books on drugs, anthropological views, pharmacological views, and in that there was a fair bit about the history of ayahuasca, so far as we knew it at that time. You know, back in the early 90s, of course, this is sort of pre-Renaissance, right? This is just as things were starting to bubble away with, you know, I don't think the Temple of the Way of Light existed back then. I went to Percy Garcia, who had appeared on a National Geographic documentary not long before. So, you know, there was the beginning of this sort of coming together of mainstream collective culture and this extraordinary pocket of of Amazonian, South American. I don't know what the best shorthand is to describe ayahuasca culture. So there was both an intent to come down and see if this could contribute to my healing, and also just a desire to continue with my journey on this planet. You know, my philosophy, so far as I have one, has been that everything is about growth. I'm here to grow and expand, and so I'm excited by situations or circumstances that facilitate that have that potential for growth. And you know, whether we look at the facing our mortality element of a potentially terminal condition, or the actual experiencing mortality, experiencing physical death, in either instance, it's a transformative experience. And so, yeah, that's certainly been my experience over the last, what are we now, 10 years since I was diagnosed. It's it's been the impetus and the inspiration for massive shifts in my psychology, in my physiology, in my neurology in various ways, and in my outer life as well. I wasn't leading retreats prior to the diagnosis. I hadn't written a book prior to the diagnosis. My familial relationships are better now than they were prior to the diagnosis. My life has been. I'm just sort of actually just like allowing that. Like, my life has changed a fair bit.
Do you think because it seems to be, I think, maybe a common theme, but for many people who are drawn to this kind of work, I think even from a really young age, maybe some deep curiosity, like you were saying, about these intangible things of life, what it means to be alive, what is death, kind of this curiosity about the unknown, about truth. Do you think that was something that was just very strong in you? So it was kind of a natural progression when you heard about something like ayahuasca, like, hey, this has a potential to answer some of these things I've been looking for.
Yeah, 100%. And I just made the very specific connection there. So I was most interested as a child. And I'm going to phrase this carefully because it's the sort of thing that could give the wrong impression. I was deeply philosophically intrigued by what my culture told me death was. So I had, one sort of pseudo-Christian culture. I grew up in the UK. There's not really a religious culture in the UK. Certainly relative to the US, we had no religion. In the US, you've got to do God to become president. In the UK, the one thing you can't do is God to become president, prime minister. So I had this pseudo-Christian idea of death that that if you've been a good boy and haven't masturbated, then you get lots of rice when you go to heaven, and if you've been naughty, you go to hell and you don't get so much rice. It was a sort of not a very convincing cosmology, it'd be fair to say. And then there was atheistic ontological materialism, essentially, that said there's nothing. That we're just physical bodies, it's randomly generated, and that falls away and become nothing. And neither were convincing, and the nothingness was probably least convincing. And so that was my meditation as a child, was like, how does something become nothing? How does death happen? Like, what would that? So I was trying to imagine it, right? Like trying to being, and being cannot conceive of not being. And I sort of struggled with that, I guess. It just felt like a really incomplete narrative. And like a lot of things, didn't account for my experience of reality. And of course, our experience with ayahuasca or with many phenomena of consciousness would be the anomalies that point to the insufficiency of the classical model or ontological materialism. So yes, there was this lack of nourishment or sufficient meaning from the two main driving worldviews or paradigms or cultural philosophical constructs. And of course, the vine of death. It makes sense that I would be most intrigued, which really is a little inexplicable. So I can say, oh yeah, I was buying encyclopedias of psychoactive substances and so on. Just as I was buying anthologies of Western philosophy, I wanted to or I was reading the Bible or the Quran. You're trying to get some access to like, yeah, what the fuck's going on here? Some truth, some insight, and something that's not completely obviously insufficient. But it remains, I think, inexplicable that I thought that going to Peru and ingesting this substance that really I knew nothing about. I don't know what I imagined I was going to get from that, but certainly I thought I was going to get something from it, and I thought it was going to be pretty profound. And so before any diagnosis, I was I've worked with most well-known medicines, and for me, it's in the same way that I've worked with most well-known spiritual traditions. I've practiced Sufism, I've practiced Zen Buddhism, I've practiced Christ mysticism. I've practiced scientific study and research, and it's for me that just seems very obvious that we would, if you're into food, you want to try different cuisines from all around the world. I think that's natural, and I love good food, but my deeper obsession has always been truth. What's real?
It's interesting because your podcast also has that word in it, truth, and it's also something that's intrigued me a lot. And I did a podcast with my friend Brian, who's he's been very immersed in the Shipibo culture. I think he's been living with Shipibo for the past 20 years. He's married to a Shipibo woman, and one of the really fascinating things he said, and I think it really stuck with me because he said it to me right after I had finished this very long process of dieting, and he was talking about the linguistics of the Shipibo, and he gave this example, and just I've mentioned it a few times in the podcast, but it's always really stuck with me. And like a common greeting in Shipibo would be "Hakunnata," and and it's often translated as like good afternoon or good day. The word nata, which is day or afternoon, they would the deeper meaning, which is I find fascinating, is it means world, but in a deeper level it means universe. And I think in a deeper level it's like this ever eternal present moment. And the word hakun, which is like good, on a deeper level, it means truth. And on a deeper level, it means that which is life giving, that which is in alignment with nature. And so it's just fascinating that this, like, this phrase that is translated as like good day actually means like this ever eternal present now is truth. It's that which gives life.
Right.
And I mean, I just imagine like if that's how we greeted each other every day, that would be a
Right.
complete shift of reality. But that word truth, I find so fascinating. And I also find it really interesting because in my own journey, that's something that's really resonated, is this idea of truth, like what is true, what is real, also the word reality. But I notice there often tends to be a lot of resistance to that, and I don't know if that comes from our education or certain ideologies like postmodernism, but this idea that then in a sense nothing is true, that everything is somehow, we can make an argument for something, and I can understand that
Relativism
too.
and so on.
Yeah, but it seems like that idea of truth is a very potent and very, I don't necessarily like this word spiritual, but that in a sense, like many, if not all of these spiritual traditions are pointing to this idea of truth, of reality, of something that can be experienced. So is that something you can talk about? Like, because you've used that word a number of times. So it obviously has some
Mm.
resonance for you, that idea of truth.
It's something that I'd love to talk about, and something that I can't talk about. Um, it's the delight. I mean, I guess this is the joke of being a speaker or a facilitator in the space of awakening or truth. Um, I'm grateful for my influence in Zen Buddhist training and a lot of the uh, recognition of the cul-de-sacs and dangers of a thought system and a organization as well when on the path. So we have a lot of safeguards within Buddhist talk, within Zen Buddhist teaching, such as the finger pointing at the moon. Don't get caught up in this Zen thing. It's not it. And the Zen teacher is spoken of as selling water by the river. You are pure awareness. Here, come along and experience your pure awareness. So there's an inherent ineffability about truth. That which is complete and total, how could anything potentially contain it? So we can use the word truth or the word God, which will mean very different things for different people, of course. Is it a capital G or a small g? Is it a capital T or a small t? So for me, there's a comparative distinction there, that God or truth, as I use it very often, will be a capital T. And this is the T, this is the truth of Henry David Thoreau, speaking of the party he attended where there was wine, there was food, but it lacked sincerity. And he sort of proclaimed in this glorious speech, as I read it, not money, not fame, not power, but truth. Give me truth. And again, kind of inexplicably, I read this in Walden all those years ago, and that lit something inside me. I felt a little less alone and a little less odd when I read that. It was like, oh wow, okay, so some dude was kind of like me. That's cool. And then again, many years later, I was in a cinema in Wellington, in New Zealand, beautiful part of the world, and I was watching Into the Wild, the extraordinary dramatic rendition of this tale of Christopher McCandless, an individual that was so impulsed by an idea of truth, by a way of being, a simplicity of life, that he was willing to stake his life upon the pursuit of that, and gave away his college fund to charity, and gave away his possessions, gave away his family, essentially, to wander off in pursuit of truth, much as Thoreau had done all those years before. And so I'm watching this film again, and again, it's got "Give me truth," and it's etched in the desk, in the wooden desk. It sort of points to some of the challenge and struggle that's often associated with truth, realization, or awakening, or whatever. And again, that lit this fire. I remember literally almost running out of the cinema. It was very much like a wake up call. It was like, oh yes, yeah, I'm here to really explore, to find out what's real, what's true. And the brain tumor diagnosis was simply another wake-up call of that nature. And intriguingly, before I was diagnosed, I read this quote. So I've been a bit of a quote junkie my whole life, and this one quote in particular just really landed. Had a a physiological response when I read it. It was like, wow, that's that nails it. And then I wrote and thus read these words after being discharged from the hospital, having found out that I'd been diagnosed. And the quote was very simply, "Death is certain, its timing uncertain. So what is important now?" Now, I'd say, that's probably a good answer to your question. Can you talk about truth? Like, well, there's truth. Death is certain, its timing uncertain. So what's important now? And I similarly am sort of enthralled by this language architecture that would have us remind each other of the presence of God, or the presence of the infinite and the eternal, right here, right now, in our shared presence, in this nature that we find ourselves. That's generally not how our cultures are set up. If anything, our culture, liberal democracy, whatever. I think we call it a liberal democracy, right? I guess it's sufficiently liberal democracy for us to know that it's not a fucking liberal democracy.
It reminds me of a really good quote I just heard, talking about quotes. There's this defector from North Korea, this beautiful woman, Yeonmi Park, I think is her name. And I mean, it really made me think, but she said, if you think you're oppressed, you're not oppressed. Because to truly be oppressed, the oppression is so much that you don't even realize you're oppressed.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that there's an inversion there of truth being too big to contain, or too ineffable, too vast to contain. And if you don't have any if you don't have access to the spectrum, that's the best way to know to not have access to the spectrum. Is to convince someone that freedom doesn't exist, or that truth doesn't exist. So we have one of our sort of very strange pursuits of people like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens before he passed, was to try and convince people in a strangely rabidly zealous way of the incompleteness of a straw man argument that they'd never actually made, and discounting all the scientific evidence in the process that God is actually great for you. God is actually really good for us neurologically. To be in appreciation, to be in awe, to be in worship, to be in feelings of safety and security. These things are really, really good for the human psychology and neurology and sociological function as well. So religion is great. Just because a few crazy guys go off and bomb a abortion clinic or whatever equivalent it is, the overall effects of religion are as a great contribution to society and individual well-being. So yeah, for a group of scientists to ignore that wealth of data that now neurotheologists such as Andrew Newberg have sort of been busy over the last few decades correcting their bigoted, judgmental view. It's kind of interesting. So again, it's that like in we're saying about the UK and God is or religion is a taboo, whereas in the US atheism is a taboo. You can be a study suggested you can be Muslim, you can be homosexual, you can be all sorts of minorities or judged groups, and people would say, yeah, you can still be president of the United States according to how they filled out this survey. But an atheist, no way. You've got to at least pretend to be religious. Like Donald Trump, he said he was religious, right? The fact that there was literally not a shred of plausibility to that statement. Obviously, we live in a world where the post-truth world, right? Where with sort of post-modernity, where this idea of truth might even be ridiculed or looked down upon. Which says a lot about the culture of the world that we find ourselves in.
You mentioned this idea of a lot of these people like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchin, maybe in their zealotry ignoring some of that science. Is that something you can talk about what you've seen in the scientific realm? Because I very much agree, and I think it's something that's very fascinating, and I think there may be some symbiotic relationship that's happening between this plant work and this loss of connection to, usually in this plant work, it's referred to as spirit, but I think in a greater population, it would be referred to God. And that word has become very dirty. And I think many people in, more liberal democracies, big cities, where there's very much kind of this consumeristic mentality, this tangible, like everything can be understood by the rational mind, that kind of disregards experiences, maybe just because they haven't been experienced, something that's beyond our normal day-to-day functioning, that it's very easy to dismiss that with the rational mind, saying, well, this isn't true. Again, kind of the word of truth, because I haven't experienced, therefore it's not true. But you also mentioned this really interesting idea with this science, and I think it's very fascinating, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is, often I find the people who've pushed that aside or disregarded that idea of God or religion, there's very often like a great suffering with those people. Like they're often very unhappy, like very discontent. And then, there's other explanations as to why that is, whether it's the external world or it's various systems that's potentially keeping them down. And yet, as you mentioned, there's this very tangible thing about often when one begins to look into that or to discover that there's a comfort that comes with that. There's a sense of purpose or joy that's actually very good for the human being. And so even if we said, it's all false, but the end product of that is suffering, and the belief of something is happiness, but we can't prove either one, let's say from that logic. Well, wouldn't we want to choose the one that leaves us happy and joy and a sense of peace and contentment?
Absolutely. And the narrative, the worldview of the Richard Dawkins, or so far as I understand it, and I read The God Delusion, so and a few of his other works, is extraordinarily bleak, and there's this idea that it's all random biology. It's a depressing meaning making, and as you say, we can consider that we have choice of narratives, regardless of whether they're true or not. A comparable example would be, we can say the glass is half full or it's half empty. In each instance, it's true, right? Absolutely right. It might be true you don't have $1 million right now, or you don't have a car that you want, or a partner that you want, or it might be true that we're lacking a particular something. But it's also true that we're in receipt of huge amounts, immeasurable, unspeakable amounts. Our breath, for one, right? Our awareness. Both of these things are pretty mysterious. Like, we know how the respiratory system works, but we still haven't really worked out how we're being breathed and then not being breathed, and yet still being awareness for a period of time, even when we're supposedly not physically capable of being awareness. So we know that consciousness survives physical death. So I think that what we find in modern science is a lot of lazy thinking, and a sort of default worldview, which is one of ontological materialism, that is a belief system that's not recognized to be a belief system. It's thought of as being reasonable or rational, but it's irrational, and reason has actually taken us to the limits of reason, just as logic has taken us to the limits of logic. And so this is an insufficient narrative. It's actually not true to say that there's no evidence for God, or that there is plenty of evidence for an infinite and eternal being that is present in all things, at the core of all phenomena. And you can look to the evidence in quantum mechanics as one, or systems theory or information theory as one area that really points to something beyond, points to something that can't be contained by the by thought, by the mind. It's paradoxical, and that can't be absorbed into a system of thought. Hence, we sort of just ignore it, or just pretend that it doesn't place consciousness as central to the manifest physical world. Yeah, it's very inconvenient. It's philosophically challenging, but it's true. If we actually, are going to really stick to this scientific method, it does bring about this fact that the observing consciousness is deterministic of what is observed, the intention and what we're seeking to measure and so on. And great scientists, Nobel Prize winners, have said that of the 11 or 12 or so main sort of interpretations of quantum mechanics that swim about, for some, the observing consciousness is that which collapses the wave function and turns waves or probability into actual physical form. Yet if you go to a leading quantum physicist today and ask them what role consciousness plays in quantum mechanics, they'll probably tell you it plays none, and get out of my office. It's like you're bringing, because physicists are aware of what the bleep do we know, right? And no one wants to be caught in another documentary where you're just answering a few questions and it turns out that you're featured in this new age, new thought, spiritual. That's not what most. Fred Alan Wolf and Amit Goswami are the exceptions to the rule of how comfortable quantum physicists are discussing matters of absolute truth.
Do you think part of that is, I often think of this, you were talking about Zen, this Zen koan, of this idea that a knife can cut everything, like all things can potentially be cut by a knife, but the one thing it can't cut is itself. And so in that way of like the mind, like it's almost like a natural pursuit for the mind to, if it can, to pursue that idea of knowing all things. But that this idea of consciousness, the very nature of the thing itself, how does it know itself? And in that paradoxical way, in a sense, like that system of observing and observed begins to break down when that duality splits or joins itself into something that's beyond that.
Right, and our software, our biological setup is able to experience this. That's one of the games that's available to have in this life is realizing God. And people tend to have a commonality to their reports. Although the translinguality is one of those commonalities. So we could say that the psychedelic experience and the divine experience, or the experience of God realization, are similarly impossible to contain in words. That certainly seems true, but it also seems true that there's a certain, if you've worked with enough sessions, enough ceremonies, there's a certain amount, as much as it's unique and will vary, you can be pretty confident certain things are going to happen and be seen and be reported and be shared. Much as if you set people up to do eye gazing, we can put aside DMT and all these extraordinary and exotic and exotic and endogenous at the same time substances. We can put them aside and just say something as simple as eye gazing. If you get two human beings, one of them might be Palestinian, one of them might be Jewish, one of them might be Arabic, one of them might be Caucasian. Those two people together looking into each other's eyes, you can predict what will happen. And people will use words like, it's like there's no me and no you. Or I'm feeling love. I just met you, and yet there's this extraordinary feeling of appreciation and care. And so, in some respects, it's kind of to deny the mystery, or to try and collapse the limitless into this little narrative of matter is absurd and goes against our day-to-day experience, and goes against what our nervous systems are naturally inclined towards experiencing. That denies, seeks to diminish the power of placebo. The power of God as well. Medical literature is littered with tales of impossible healings happening, and many of them, the people would attribute them to God. There was a great Louis Theroux episode where he was going into this Los Angeles hospital ostensibly to demonstrate how our fear of death causes us to perpetuate life at all costs, often causing great suffering and costing huge amounts of money. And this guy was admitted whilst he was there, and the neurologist said, yeah, he will be a vegetable for the rest of his life. He was in a coma. His sister and family were very clear. There was an African-American family with very strong religious beliefs. And they said to the doctor, look, we hear you. We understand you've got to say what you've got to say, and we give credence to your truth. But it's not true. He is waking up and he's going to be fine. And the TV presenter and everyone's a bit like, oh, how cute, the suffering family, holding on to faith, holding on to hope. But then something happened. He woke up. And when Louis Theroux expressed surprise to his sister, she was like, I told you. Like, did you not hear? I said he was going to wake up. So I think, I hope that all that's unfolding upon the planet right now can give rise to conversations as to how we can have the direct experience of health, of God, how we are extraordinarily powerful in our consciousness, and that we, each individual human has a sacredness and an inherent and immeasurable worth, a divinity. Yeah, and I'm an optimist, so maybe that is somehow what will transpire and manifest through this great drama that's unfolding across the planet right now.
You mentioned this idea of fear of death, and kind of going back to that theme, that power is so strong. I mean, the things that have been done in the name of fear, or conquering that, or seemingly alleviating that, because it's very rare that usually the remedy is getting to the root of it. It's usually somehow like avoiding it, or temporarily making it disappear, seemingly. And yet, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's something I think people often forget about, is that word for ayahuasca. It means vine of the dead. And I think it's something people often kind of overlook, or, as you said, oh, well, that's just a cute name. But, it's really about rainbows and unicorns and talking to little green men. And but that even in the name is this idea that this plant is taking you into death. And I think many people, when they hear that, they're like, well, why the hell would I want to do that? Like, that's something I want to procrastinate for as long as possible, because that's the end of me. It's scary. Like, the mind can't comprehend that. So why would I want to drink, to go to the jungle, which is already kind of scary to people, sit in the ceremony, listen to these weird songs, purge my guts out, and potentially have to go into death?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And it reminds me of Richard Rudd writing in the Gene Keys. He spoke about, he said, if you find yourself sort of being a non-duality teacher or whatever, and that's something that I've been described as I lead gatherings, and then essentially you're selling death. And so don't expect to be too popular. A lot of my spiritual teacher friends, they seem to be teaching how to have better sex, or how to get more money. Half of them have become cryptocurrency consultants, and that's cool. Like, I fair play to them, and I can see how that would be easier to market. There's a well-known spiritual teacher who he was a young Dutch, or he gives it away, non-duality teacher, and then my understanding is someone advised him that there's not a lot of money in non-duality. Law of attraction, on the other hand. So he then sort of evolved his teaching to be this sort of non-dual law of attraction, and since then has done very well financially, is my understanding. So yeah, good on him. But there's a persistent popularity with this inexplicable, undesirable. And what comes to me actually is an answer, like, why it is that our spirit, what we are, wants to know itself. Truth wants to know itself. And there's another response which came up from my experience. I attended, I think it was at the time, the world's first Vipassana, non-dual inquiry, yoga, qigong, ayahuasca, and 5-MeO DMT retreat at a private house in Mexico, where on the bay, UFO sightings are predictable and regular and very intriguing. And I found myself going on this retreat with no reason to go on this retreat. Like I really felt that I'd sort of done, I felt like I'd done my healing work with all the medicines that were involved. And I didn't have any curiosity about, I knew what 5-MeO DMT involved, and therefore I didn't want to be involved in that. I'd never really felt that intrigued about smoking DMT and DMT either, for whatever reason. And that curiosity that was there for everything wasn't there for these. But I couldn't really afford it at the time either, and there was 100 reasons why not to go. And when I arrived, I said to the facilitator, like, I'm just here because you're a mate. Really. I don't think I'm going to take any medicine. But then I did the first and then the second, and then moving up to the Friday night, which is the high dose of the 5-MeO DMT. So we've flirted, we've danced, and now we're going for an all-in embrace. No turning back, no half measures. And I suddenly became clear that no one had any idea how much we were actually doing, because no one had any idea how strong what we were doing. So everyone was talking about grammage, but if you don't know the volume strength of the grammage that you're doing, it's meaningless. If you've got 99% pure 5-MeO DMT and you're doing a microgram, that's very different from doing 5% strength or purity. So in that recognition of the extent to which we were just playing around with profound ignorance for something that's profoundly powerful, I asked for a sign. I said I wanted to have a sign. And I went into my dreams with the intent that a sign would come forth. And in the middle of the night, my roommate wakes me up and he says, Will, guess what just happened in the bathroom? I don't know. He said, I became you. And the words that came out of my mouth were, my name is Will Pye and the dose is too high. I'm like, oh. Suddenly I'm paying attention to what he said, because I thought he was just going to go off on some irrelevant, random, but this is really pertinent. And then I went to sleep and had a dream about a spoon, blah, 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 that told me not to go into that ceremony. So I woke up the next day and said, yeah, I've got really clear in my guidance. I'm not going to be participating in the ceremony. I couldn't find an answer to that question. Why would we do this? And so the ceremony happened, and I was just sitting there and listening to music, loving things, loving life, feeling great. And then suddenly this answer came into my experience. Like, why would I do this? And it's like for the joy of it. So it was like yes, there's no great healing need in this instance. It's not. There's no problems. There's nothing needs fixing. But there is one possible reason, and that's to have a new experience of joy. So I went to the facilitator and said, "Is it still possible?" And it was. And I remember he put the pipe to my mouth. It was visibly, sort of, wow, that's big. It's a lot bigger. It turns out it was the biggest that anyone on the retreat was served. So it goes to show, if you really want to set yourself up, stand out as unusual in some way, and the facilitator thinks, this guy needs a large dose. and the experience that unfolded, though predominantly ineffable and inherently translingual, and I wasn't there for the vast majority of the experience to be recounting anything. What also happened was a bodygasm. So this body having an energetic orgasm. And this is a body that's had seizures, that's had grand mal seizures. So usually unconscious movement of energy through this body is not a desirable, pleasant thing. And yet here I am in this ongoing state of bliss. And then this chanting happens coming out of my mouth. I'm hearing it much as others are hearing it, like, wow, that's pretty rad. That sounds pretty amazing. So truth could be a reason. We may have the embodied neurochemical, biochemical experience of truth, of bliss, of joy, of our own divinity, and our own non-physical nature. Somehow this physical body was being used by something, someone, to make noises that it was clear had a function and a purpose to bring this body-mind back into some state of familiarity, relocating itself in time and space. I mean, of course, I could not know that I would have those experiences, but that would be my answer now, is why we might work with such medicines. Is they give us the direct experience of truth. And that's a priceless thing to experience in a human body.
You were saying that like these seizures or something you've experienced, and I'm guessing that comes from the brain tumor. Is that something you can speak more about, like that journey of what that's been like to I guess kind of the initial like diagnosis and how like you were able to process that, and then like is that something that, I mean, you mentioned in the beginning, even coming down to the temple, it was like that there was elements of both, like this natural curiosity, but then this other thing too that's now very present in your life and very, I would imagine in a way it's like there's kind of no ignoring it. It's like something that's very, very much present now, and that's something that, however you want to look at it, nature, the universe is it's like, hey, there's this thing here now. So and maybe how that's changed you or helped you to grow. And because I think for so many of these things, when people receive these kind of diagnoses, there's often like a shock, a disbelief. I mean, I think there's even people have written about these stages that people go through. But from your experience, like how that's
I've
transformed
written about
you.
them.
Yeah.
I remember quoting Kubler-Ross's model of grief and accepting loss and death. It's comparable to encountering one's own mortality or a condition that is likely to end one's life. And by grace, I had none of that. I was straight to acceptance, and I also didn't think it was going to kill me either. I had just a deep knowing that wasn't going to be the case. Certainly not in the short term. Though there was no reason to know that. That was just my clear sense. And the quote did something. That, this reading this quote that I had written down days prior, and then in this really unlikely chain of events, this being the first words that I read post-diagnosis, it was like a tap on the shoulder by God itself, by God herself. It was, it was part of me knew that this quote was more meaningful than any of the other thousands of quotes that I've loved, and that I'm going to write it down in my journal, and I'm not going to write anything about it, such that there's nothing clouding it, such that I don't know how easy it is to imagine. You've just been diagnosed with a terminal condition, at least potentially terminal condition. And you get home as a word lover, a quote lover, a journaler, and your own journal recounts your physiological move or being moved days prior with a quote that could not be more pertinent and relevant if you had trawled through every single quote online in order to find the most relevant and pertinent quote to someone that's just been diagnosed with a brain tumor. And I hasten to add, just as relevant for everyone who hasn't been diagnosed with a brain tumor. Death is certain, its timing is uncertain. So what is important now? That's how we should be living every single day. That's how an intelligent human would live every single day. How few people live anything like that, actually, in that degree of awareness and aliveness. So for me, it was without suffering. It was so clearly a continuation of the journey that I had been on, a continuation of this soul's journey, we could say, and also so clearly an invitation to deepen that journey, and a means of deepening that journey, a means of answering that question by doing things like the writing and the Love and Truth Party and so on. These things that not aren't necessarily money spinners, or well, they're not, but I have to do. They have truth. They have value. They have quality. Like for me to have a fulfilled life, there are some things that have to happen. And the seizures were what led me to being aware of the tumor. And seizures are a fascinating area of physiological, psychological, spiritual material. And many mystics have had seizures over the years. There's this interesting correlation. the science, the research of people that have had seizures shows that we very often have an inexplicable, deep sense of well-being associated with, it seems, the seizures. So I had a seizure a few days ago, first one in years, having had a diagnosis of a recurrence. So most likely the two are related. And I fell to the floor. Actually, no, I got to the floor knowing that I would otherwise fall to the floor. And I discovered that I wasn't in control of my body. I couldn't get it to do what I wanted it to do. And it wanted to do things. I think my arm went up in the air like this. So the guy driving past, who stopped and called the ambulance, he sees this guy like on the floor with his arm. And I can't do my normal breathing thing where I bring my nervous system to balance and avoid seizures. Instead, there's this sort of like snoring thing happening, apparently, this guy told me. So it's a shit experience. That's what I'm simply pointing out. There's nothing good about having a seizure. It's, end up on the floor, get the ambulance bill through, it's, I can't drive now, it's, but the way I've explained it to my friend Ryan recently, that there's something profound in the near seizure experience, so that this strong energy arises, and the mind fears that my mind feared that it was either death or a seizure happening, and I learned with practice to surrender to death and or seizure, whatever's about to happen, because clearly I don't get to have choice in either instance. If that's going to happen, that's going to happen. But what I simultaneously learned is that if at the same time I breathe into the center of my heart and down into my feet and into the earth, it seems to help the nervous system settle. And maybe there's something about that as a psychonaut that perhaps you can relate to, that to go to those places of immensity, or to go to those places of intensity, and to come back. There's just profound value in that, and I don't see death as a failure. We have a very strange, or indeed as the end. So we have a very strange relationship with death, and when we're talking about God, and it's the same thing with death, right? Our Western culture has got this really fucked up relationship with death. 6 Feet Under did this wonderful job of shining a light on just how insane we are in our relationship with death. In the US, we put them like a model and make it look like they're not dead, and they've had their face blown off. We reconstructed them, and it's like, oh, they're lovely. That's a lie. Their head got blown off, but somehow we've decided that it's easier to have this embalming and modeling process. But what the lead character in that, for me, argues is that we need to feel our grief. We need to express our pain. And in my view, the evidence seems very clear that it's not the end. So I'm deeply intrigued as to what will happen when I die, when this body ceases to be. Yeah, and I don't know what that's going to involve, and that's it. Seems to be that's the nature of this reality. You don't get to, for the vast majority of people, you don't get to have a death experience until you actually have a death experience. But we have many people, of course, who have been physically dead and been able to report that they had conversations with people and there was a communication that they had a choice at this point that they could go back or not. Or sometimes it's more of the case that you have to go back. You haven't done your agreement hasn't been fulfilled yet. So in this sense, I have a deep trust. I'm still very much in the process of allowing health, of allowing healing, and allowing this brain to be in perfect health and balance, and for any disease to be reversed or stabilized or resolved. And the doctor's predictions from here would not be good in terms of how long I have to live. So what's certainly true, of course, is that I will die. Whether it's 50 years down the track, with a best-selling book on how I cured brain cancer as part of it, or I keel over tomorrow afternoon, or whatever it is. So I'm ready to die in a sense, and in another sense, not at all. And I'm not sure how that would be possible. I think at 80 or 90, with big family and written 50 books, and maybe at that point a sort of Houston Smith sort of level of accomplishment and contribution to the world, you might sort of think, okay, yeah, there's not a great deal more I can do. I certainly don't have that sense, but I don't have any fear of death, and I think part of those seizure experiences has helped give the experience of biochemical, physiological fear, and to lean into that, to die to that. So which I'm sure it's obvious, it's sort of the parallels with psychonautic exploration, right? This is another reason we could say to work with these medicines is to practice death, to practice dying before we die.
So that we can truly live, or
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an ever expanding freedom in the recognition of my mortality. And what I mean by that is that the more aware I am of death's imminence, the more freedom there is in terms of what to do. there's really, that's something I'm still very much in the process of discovering. It's just still answering that question: what's important now? Like, death isn't going to wait until the end of the podcast. Though sometimes things like this do happen, right? Someone says they're not going to die until their daughter reaches them, and after 10 days of travel, they show up, and the person does pass at that point. So that's fascinating for me to ponder. It's like, okay, so it's one thing to know that I'm going to die. That's true for everyone. I don't know when I'm going to die. There are outliers on both ends of the bell curve, right? So someone's been in my circumstance and is still alive after decades. Others die within a year. So, so my situation really isn't that different from anyone else's, apart from occasionally having seizures. I don't have any plans to have any more, so I don't want to make that sound like an intention moving forward. And there's also, you said, "Are you there, Will?" There's this. I've had this thing when people die. It's not something that's affected me a great deal in life. I've had a couple of dogs, a couple of grandparents, but no close family members, no close friends. Actually, that's not true. One close friend, and I kind of, when he died, I was like, my love for him increased, because it was like, oh, he's teaching me about loss. What it feels just to lose someone that you love and care about. I generally haven't had to experience loss much in this life. I'm not really sure where I was going with that train of thought. Just simply that on the few occasions when people that I have been energetically connected with have died, I've had a sense of them going. I've had a sense of them being in that in-between space, and there being some degree to which it's possible to communicate with them. Although that communication would be nothing really more than, all good, or all bad, but like, I'm here. I'm no longer there, but I am here. And everything in my experience points to the survival of consciousness beyond physical death. And there's a really beautiful clip on the internet of this family talking about how they were really intrigued when one of the sisters, they talked about, when one of us goes, we'll try and send a message back to say, yes, there's an afterlife, to yes, death is not the end. And so, well, how will we do that? I'll use a red scarlet bird, because that's our favorite bird, and so on. And you can find this footage of a scarlet bird turning up, and then red scarlet, and then not flying off when it's given the opportunity to, and flying back onto her shoulder and displaying behavior that I think any ornithologist would agree is extraordinary behavior for a wild bird to do. And I had a friend who completed another interesting element to living a fully alive life and preparing for death is on the one hand, do I want to complete everything that I'm here to do, to write all the books or to sing all the songs or to have all the relationships or whatever, or do I want to leave some really important things to do so that I can still stay alive? So I have a guy called Scott Dinsdale as a member of his community. He seemed to be at the peak of human experience. He was in a beautiful relationship with this wonderful global community, a purposeful business, traveling the world, and rock found its way down Mount Kilimanjaro and hit his head of all the places it could have passed, and that was it. That was over. And so, maybe that's how it works. We actually complete everything that we're here to do, and then we die. And maybe that's actually how it works. And maybe he and his partner Chelsea had an agreement coming into this life of that nature. A friend of mine completed his first ever musical album, and in launching the album, he played a song at one event, which is about the last day alive. And he died the next day. His wife was wondering why he was playing that song, because it's not the hit, or it's not the one that he usually leads with. And yet he played that, and then he died the next day. And for me, that was very clear that part of that was a soulful communication. Say this is going to fucking hurt, but don't forget this is all part of the plan. This is, it's not a mistake. Yeah. And of course, we stumble in all this upon our concepts of time within Western culture, which is very different in cultures you've immersed yourself in, and there's not this linearity or beginning, middle, and end way of thinking about time. A lot of our thinking about past lives and so on is built upon this premise of how time works. But if we have a different conception of time, it makes no sense to talk about past lives. Am I existing in another dimension? Of course. Yeah.
It's very interesting because just yesterday I got news. I was standing in line for a bank, and it was a kind of a long queue. So I took out my phone, and there was this message, and I opened it, and the first line was something like, "Jason, I have some very bad news. Our friend Patricia was in an accident, and she died." And it was very shocking in a way, because even like in the sentence, like I expected some sort of build up to it. Like she was in an accident and this and this happened, and maybe somewhere deeper in that paragraph would have been like she died. but it was just like in this opening line. And
which is the nature of death as we understand it, right? As we're talking, it is a it's not a sort of or is it?
yeah, and it was
You
very
know,
strange, and very much like that idea you were speaking of. It's death is imminent. Death is is known. This will happen, but the timing is unknown. And it's very interesting because with someone like her, like she was such a joyful person, so full of life, like I think so much seemingly on the horizon, and then like that, it was a motor accident, so it was instantaneous. But it's like I could observe in my mind, and I think in everyone in a way, there's it got back to this sense of, well, there's always going to be more time. Like, of course, I'll be able to see her again. I'll be able to share with her again. Like, and then all of a sudden, that reality sets in of there's no more time in that way. And yet, also very interesting because the last couple of days, there's been this like very deep sense of peace in a way, like a deep sadness, a nostalgia, but a sense of peace. And also almost this sensation of like she's more present now than before, like all of who she is, all of who she was, all of who she is still there, and but even in a stronger sense. And it just it's a very strange time. Time is very strange. And I think that's a really, because that's something I've often, we probably have a similar way of looking at things in that regard, but often there's this sense of, as you said, this idea of past lives and future lives. And yet very much as you said, it's still in this linear idea of time. And even when I was very young and I was kind of pondering that, uh, for me, it was kind of like that analogy of someone asks this teacher, like, well, what's holding up the world? Or no, the teacher asks, what's holding up the world? And this woman raises her hand and she says, a giant tortoise. That's what's holding up the world. And he says, okay, but what's underneath that tortoise? And she goes, well, it's just tortoises all the way down. But with that idea of past lives, that was always like something that was very, even from a young age, it was like, well, I see that. I can see how there can even be comfort. And we were speaking about that in that way, because it seemingly like answers that question. Well, if I die, or where was I before? Well, it was a past life, or there's a future life. And yet that seemingly doesn't get to the root of, well, what is life? It seems like just another layer. Or even this idea, often things we don't know or understand, we may, there's like this common idea of like, where do humans come from? And like, there's a very strong theory, and it could be very, very probable. It's definitely plausible, but even very probable that, it was alien life that came. And then it's like, okay, well, now I know, now I have an answer. It was alien life. But where did they come from? Where was the essence of their life? And it seems like so many of these things are just these kind of infinite thought patterns that seemingly give us comfort, but they don't necessarily get to the root of the very question we're looking at. It also reminds me of something very fascinating. Often where I work and where you've been at the temple, we often ask people, why are you here? And it's a seemingly very simple question. not in some existential sense, like, why are you here at the temple? What are you looking to do?
I asked a guest at a meditation gathering recently, what brings you here? And her response was, my guides told me to come because your guides told my guides to get me here. I was like, okay, can't wait to hear what you have to share.
There's this very interesting phenomena which I've seen, which is it's very easy for people to point out why they're here or there in a negative sense, and not in a sense of like an emotionally negative sense, but in the negation of something. Like
I'm not here because of this, or
yeah, or something like I want the suffering to end. You know, I have this crippling anxiety and I want that to end, or I have this trauma and I want to be free of that. But it's very fascinating because upon deeper inquiry, if you really ask the person, like, well, but why do you want that to end? Like, what is it that you're actually looking for? It's often very difficult for us to say, like, well, what is it that I'm actually looking for? Like, what is at the root? Because what if that went away and my life was worse? I mean, that's a probability. So it's not the thing itself that we're really wanting that to go away, because we have no idea. We think we know what's on the other side of that, but it's very difficult for people to name that. And often at the root, there's some idea of like the sense of freedom or of peace, of connection, of oneness. And it's also where it gets tricky because it's very difficult to put that into words. But I guess all of this of what I'm speaking about is kind of this idea that you were talking about, like this nature of time, and that so many of us look at it in a very linear sense. And so when you mention this idea of past lives, like that seems to be a logical conclusion. If time is linear, well, then I had a life before and I have a life after. And it's also very fascinating because almost always that life before was, you know, I was the king of Egypt, or, you know, it's usually quite special. It's very rarely like, well, I was, you know, the plumber or something. But can you speak to that idea of time? And because, you know, I think what you're pointing towards is very, very invaluable. And to what you were speaking about earlier, like this sense of like, what do I do now? Like how, because all of that, in a sense, like that can die away at any second. And it, you know, so, but what in this moment is actually life?
yeah, right. Wittgenstein, Austrian German philosopher and linguist, spoke of the limits of our language being the limits of our world. Zen master Jumpo Dennis Kelly Roshi recently passed, actually, spoke about it. If you can't describe it, it didn't happen. So he is big on telling people why we're meditating, like meditation, why bother? Yeah, providing the philosophical understanding of what has brought us to here, and why we're going to sit down and not move and observe our breath for a while. And then also when an enlightenment experience happens, or when a shift happens, being able to articulate that, having some language to describe this new territory. And so the experience can be incorporated into the psychology, into the into the person's self-understanding. that can be really problematic, of course. Including when we bring in different languages. So in Buddhism, we have my Dharma name is Ku, which is Japanese for shunyata, or which is the Sanskrit word for, or that gets translated as emptiness. And emptiness is a negation, right? It's a lack of something. It's a no thing. And in our culture, in Western culture, the zero or the nothing is seen as less than. The absence of is seen as less than. And which is a curious bias, but it does seem to be there, and maybe it's our fear of death, and maybe it's our fear of nothingness as a non-existence. And that word emptiness is really problematic to describe the enlightenment experience, or the falling away of a personal self, the falling away of a self-referencing narrative, or the arising of a deep peace. There are different ways that we can articulate, attempt to express all that. Jumpo Dennis Kelly, he would speak about clear, deep heart mind. That place, clear, deep heart mind. And we are already clear, deep heart mind. And yet we may have the experience of becoming clear, deep heart mind, of realizing that we are clear, deep heart mind. And so in Zen, there's two main dominant schools. One says we sit in order to become enlightened. The other says we sit in order to enjoy our enlightenment, in order to enjoy our experience of being pure awareness. And at times seems to be even more problematic, even more foundational in shaping our view of the world. So long as we're in language, that language is going to be limited. Language is limiting. It's both creative and limiting. In Christian texts and in Vedic texts, we hear in the beginning was the word, right? This like vibrational thing. Out of the void, out of the no thing, came this primordial vibrational hum that ultimately is manifesting now as you and as I and as all of this world of apparent form that we know, by the way, is empty. So we know from our scientific inquiry that what looks solid is actually not. That's a trick of the brain. The brain makes it appear solid. And the brain doesn't also have any distinction between whether we're imagining it or directly experiencing it, which is kind of interesting. We ponder ponder that. Yeah, so it seems that time is really how we conceive of time is profoundly causative in terms of determining our experience, and indeed determining our neurological functioning. Like this is where it gets kind of fascinating from a chicken or egg scenario. Does my contemplating the present moment cause my neurology to adjust into a more harmonic whole brain communication or less default mode network activity, or vice versa? Does the fact of this present moment just give rise to the or does the fact of my neurology give rise to the direct experience of the present moment? And there's a form of communication that occurs that's non-verbal, as an internally sourced information gathering that would be called intuition, right? We just know something. We just know not to go down that alleyway, or to go down that alleyway, or to we just have a knowing. And when that's happening between two people, we call it telepathy. Or when it's happening between one person and another location, we call it remote viewing. So all of these things point to oneness. They point to what John Wheeler, the Feynman's teacher, physicist, spoke about the single electron thought experiment. So his notion was, looking at the data, there's nothing to rule out the reality that there's just one electron experiencing itself superimposed, multi-imposed, multi-dimensional, which is, of course, another creation story. It sounds a bit like God, right? But it's from a physicist. Why does the electron superimpose itself? Why does nothing become something? Why did the indivisible, infinite and eternal no thing become something? Was God lonely? Was God wanting to become something more than it already was? Truly, to be alive and to have such thoughts, to ponder such ponderables, is such an exquisite gift. and maybe here is the, what's important now is to do that we find most joyful, to do that which we find most meaningful, to give our time to that which is most most delightful. And for me, that looks like a lot of time doing nothing. I love walking in nature. Yeah, that feels rich and significant and precious. And if this is the last moment, yeah, I'd love it to be enjoying pine trees or experiencing sun on my skin, or the sound of a lyrebird. There's obviously a mentality in Western culture that no, I should be accruing more money or getting more done um, or seeing more nature. Like tick off everything on my list. See everything around the world. Yeah, but none of that is alive for me as being particularly important.
You spoke about this very interesting idea, and it reminded me. I don't know if you've ever read Stephen Harold Buhner, I think is his name. He's written a number of books. He's I guess you would call him an herbalist by training, and he wrote a very beautiful book, and it was called, I believe it was called Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm. And it's a very big book. It's I don't know how many pages it is, but it's quite thick. And I remember reading it, and it was very interesting because I would say like the first half of the book, I found myself kind of struggling to get through it. It was it was very non-linear also. And I think that's a bit his way of writing. It was just seemingly very random. And at some point, I remember thinking, like, why am I reading this? Like, I don't seem to be absorbing anything. And yet something, I kept going. And then at some point, maybe around halfway through, it felt like something began to come through.
Mm.
And very much in this way of like a non-direct teaching. It wasn't so much inherently what he was saying, but there was something behind that was being spoken about or taught. And one of his big things that he kept pointing to was this idea of like the imaginal realm. And so when you were speaking about this idea between like the brain the brain can't necessarily differentiate between what is experienced in this reality with the five senses versus something that can be imagined. And I think for a lot of people that may seem very confusing, but really common examples. Like if we're in the water and we think there may be sharks, like most people experience like this very visceral reaction, this fear, sweaty palms, and yet there's no real danger. There's nothing that's
Yeah.
actually affecting them right now, and yet all of those neurons and neural pathways and sense perceptions are fired. And often with a lot of this plant work, it seems like even like as they begin to map the brain a little bit, something that I read, which was very fascinating, and at first it didn't make sense until I thought more about it. But they were saying when they were mapping the brains of people who were taking ayahuasca or psilocybin, that everything was lit up. And there's often this idea like we're only using a certain amount of our brain, and when they were on these substances, like everything was lit up, and yet they said things were working much slower. And at first that seemed a little paradoxical to me. Well, if everything is lit up, it must be that things are working faster. And yet they said it was slowing down. And by slowing down, everything became lit up. And very much like this idea of you were talking about, it's like there's often this desire to do more, because if we do more, then we'll receive more. And yet this idea of just being in nature, doing nothing, actually something is actually opened up. More of our brain is being activated. And they said the closest thing that it could resemble was that of a child. And it's very interesting because I had an interview recently with my friend Diana, and she was saying she's a mother now of a young child. And she was saying for this child, like the difference between her reality, Diana's reality, and the child's reality is very different. Like the
Mm.
child has breakfast with unicorns and she talks to giraffes. And for
Mm.
her, like that space is much less defined than most of our space. Like most of us, it's what is real is that which we can touch, we can experience. And yet going back to this idea of Stephen Harold Buhner and plant medicines, it's like this imaginal realm is extremely real. And I think more in this kind of generic shamanic sense, it's like that's where a lot of the power lies, is in the dream space, in the unconscious, in the world that we don't have access to here and now. In the world of form, as you were saying, there's something empty, there's something, and that emptiness is far more vast, far greater. Like the atoms, they're few and far between. They're real, but the emptiness is far more vast than that. And so like in that way, the imaginal realm has this maybe infinite possibility, and that's where this power of shamans or people who can tap into that, it's like they can bring this this space that most of us, whether we've forgotten the access to it or for whatever reason we've become removed from it, that imaginal realm has this tremendous power, this tremendous beauty. So again, I don't know if there's a question there, but but just
Well,
this idea again of like the reality versus, as you said, like the brain being not necessarily being able to perceive the difference between reality and that imaginal realm, and where all this potential healing or benefit or expansion can come from, if we can access that.
Yeah, right. Um, there's a couple of things that came up as you were speaking. One was this wonderful word, imaginal, and I've heard that used with regards the butterfly. That in the process of metamorphosis, in the process of um, destruction, so it wraps itself up in this cocoon and then dissolves itself in its own acidic stomach juices. I think that's fairly close to accurate, I think. And in that moment of destruction, in that moment of death, there's an imaginal cell that knows butterfly, that knows what it is to be a butterfly. They've actually identified, that's not a hypothesis, there is a cell there that's function and role is to remember or to now embody, to now biologically express butterfly. Similarly, an acorn somehow has encoded into it what it is to become a tree, what it is to become an oak. And Rupert Sheldrake offered us this wonderful hypothesis of morphogenetic fields as being the mechanism by which there's this crossover between the unconscious and the conscious, or the formless and the form. And what also came up was that we, rather extraordinarily, with our knowledge now of neuroplasticity, if we assume that the brain is at least the seat of consciousness, or the receiver of consciousness, if not the creator or cause of consciousness, we can put aside that childish notion, then the fact that within this neurology, I can imagine a different neurology, and then that neurology come into form. And that could be a specific imagining. It could be visualizing my left and right brain communicating, or it could be just doing lots of spatial stuff, and my hippocampus will grow, or just lots of meditation, and we don't know why, that my protective casing of the brain will increase by 0.5 millimeter. We don't know if that's a good thing but we assume it probably is, because these people have been doing lots of meditation, and we probably ascribe value to that as being a positive. But who knows, it might be making them more dense. So there's really something quite at the heart of this experience we're having in the physical world. We see it in the butterflies, we see it in our own capacity to grow and evolve, which, as Gandhi said, is actually the great discovery of the atomic age, is that we can recreate ourselves. And Joe Dispenza is a teacher of our modern times who's doing a great job of showing how you can recreate yourself, how you can change the habit of being yourself, I think is one of the titles of his books. And he talks about a process where he was on the verge of paralysis, and all the experts told him he needed to have severe surgery in order to prevent paralysis, or in order to live. And he decided, felt, intuited that he could use his imagination to reform his spine. And he describes that process in such a way that he was kind of like you were with the book, not really connected. Like you know you're reading it. I've just read that chapter, or I've read half a book, or whatever. But you're not really in it. You're not really gelling. It's like you can be spending time with someone, but if you're not really connected, if you're not getting on, it feels like you're not really with them, even though you sort of physically are. And he spoke about reaching a point after several months of several hours a day of this meditating and imagining, where it felt true, where it resonated, where it was done. So he could now hold that image. That was part of his reality. His brain had now accepted that reality. And then in his model, I understand he would say his nervous system and immune system and every part of his physical body was able to reflect this new mind, to express this new mind. And it's, as you were talking about reading the book, it's like I imagine, you know, can you read something in a foreign language and over time start to understand it? Be an interesting experiment. A tough one to do, right? Because you could start reading Spanish, and of course it's the Latin connection that causes you to know that it was this. But that, I mean, if there's no sounds that allow you a way in, I don't know how that would work, right? Like if you just gave me Mandarin or Cantonese text, where would I start? I mean, it would be an entirely different experience neurologically. And there's a great book called The Geography of Thought that looks at how we think differently fundamentally as humans based upon an East-West split that sounds like a sort of convenient shorthand, but actually has solid categorical distinctions. And there's all these wonderful experiments you can do with a person born in America living in Hong Kong, or a person born in Hong Kong now living in mainland China, or a person born in mainland China now living in Los Angeles. And you can do all these very different, clever experiments to see what comes first. Does the culture affect the thinking, or does the thinking affect the culture? And what Nesbitt would argue very successfully in this book is that we think fundamentally differently. And as Westerners, we would be more inclined to think about separation, about the individual, about the different components of a scene. And an Easterner, someone who grew up in a Oriental culture in China or Japan or Korea, will more likely think in terms of the whole scene rather than different components of the scene. And we see that in my friends in China are far more inclined to think about the family and the state or the community first and foremost, whereas my friends in America are more inclined to think about me, about their rights. So, you know, it is rather beautiful, perhaps, to conceive of the human as having these imaginal selves, that we have this evolutionary potential or capacity. And what I know from my own physiology, from my own system, my own very limited experience of life over 42 years, is just how functional and happy and peaceful and contributing to others this body can be, having previously been very dysfunctional. You know, so I've experienced depression, I've experienced addiction, I've experienced, you know, a major illness that could by itself end this life. And hopefully at one point I'll be able to soon say that's completely resolved and there's no illness. And we certainly know that that's possible, that bodies go from being ill to being healthy, sometimes without any explanation, any understanding as to why. So the mystery of healing. Yeah. Which for me gives great hope for humanity. It does seem that there is a power to this truth, to this imagining. Yeah, that yeah, maybe that's why we're here at such a time of such great dysfunctionality collectively, is to be able to point to functionality and what it looks like to create the physiological transformation into higher functionality. We could say that's what's happening with meditation becoming so globally popular, and plant spirit medicines becoming done with greater frequency and in depth and wisdom.
The first book you wrote, can you speak a little bit about that? I know it's difficult to encapsulate an entire book, but maybe what was the impetus to write that, and kind of the message you were looking to have people receive from that?
So the impetus, I wanted to write a book, like many people, I had wanted to write a book and had intended to write a book, and had started to write novels, and had started to write an encyclopedia of truth. I was interviewing Amit Goswami and Ken Wilber and Peter Russell and all sorts of great minds. And then this diagnosis happened, and I was struck by how there was a total absence of stress or suffering. And looking around the place, humans seem to suffer life a lot, even when there's nothing happening. People experience depression or anxiety or dissatisfaction, and so it just struck me as interesting that there was this experience of peace and contentment and a sense of opportunity. I just thought that was pretty helpful. There was something in how I was perceiving reality that was useful, that was helpful, and blessed with a brain tumor had a really nice ring to it, a little bit provocative, a little bit cheeky, a little bit playing with words as well. Blessed, that's usually a religious term. So my atheistic English friends suggested that would ensure it didn't have any commercial success in the UK, when maybe they were right. And the book is designed to actually take people on a journey of a wake-up call without the inconvenience of having one. So at the end of each chapter, the first half is the 7 gifts. It's like how I was blessed with a brain tumor, how it was a gift, how it gave me so much in so many different ways. And the second half is the invitations, kind of like how to future-proof yourself to not suffer life, to work through our adversity and our difficulty, our pain, our suffering as skillfully and as elegantly as we can, and to grow and evolve from that suffering and from that difficulty. And then so each chapter will end with exercises or questions designed to facilitate insight or embodiment of that insight. So, including things like, who do you love? Call them, and tell them, or text them now and tell them. Who do you know in your community who is lonely? Is there an elderly person that you know that would probably appreciate you knocking on their door and saying, "G'day, can I help?" We say family is important to us, for example. Are we living that? I might say my family is so important to me, and that's why I work 80 hours a week. And don't see them most of the time. And there could be profound truth in that, right? It could be that's what's happening, but it might also be something else there that I'm missing. I say my family is important, but actually my work is more important. Or I say being happy is important, but I spend all my time drinking alcohol or watching pornography or things that don't deliver any sort of lasting happiness or contentment. So where am I out of alignment? So yeah, the book attempts to take people on that journey. I think it does it fairly well, so far as a book can do that. People report pretty profound experiences reading it. It's a pretty rough and ready book. I project managed it myself. I had some great talented editors working on it, but my second book was produced by a professional publishing company, and I think it's evident that's happened. It's a little bit more polished. It's got a horrible cover because the publishing company gets to choose that rather than me. And so I hope it will help people experience more transformation and peace, and that sort of impetus of a wake-up call. But as I say, through reading the book. And cancer is pretty inconvenient, so it's nice to avoid it.
That second book, can you speak about that?
The gratitude prescription is an attempt to really distill for me, gratitude is up there with water and sleep and movement as being so essential to our well-being and also necessary. So if we don't move, if we stop moving, we start to experience muscular entropy, right? We start to die. Our capacity, if we don't use it, we lose it. So we really do need to exercise. And of course, this is a modern concept because we don't get enough exercise naturally just by being out and about and harvesting the crops or searching for the food or whatever. It's kind of the same for me with gratitude. It's yes, it's half full and yes, it's half empty. So how about training a brain to see the half full reality, to balance out the negativity bias of it's half empty. And it's also one of the most well-researched sort of spiritual practices or journaling practices, and has some of the most striking benefits to us in our physiology, in our psychology, in our sociological function, how we show up as citizens or as community members and so on. So as the name would suggest, the prescription, I see it as a cure for illness as well. For me, gratitude was, along with exercise and changing my diet, the most effective resolution for depression. So my cure for depression ultimately was to write out what I'm grateful for, and to write out what's good about me. So I would literally create my world and create myself through a journaling process, each morning and each night. And I know that created a more grateful brain, a more open nervous system. Yeah, so the gratitude prescription is designed to give people a chance to really dive into gratitude as a practice, and to bring that into their into their life. And I did an online course of the same name that gives a deeper dive into all of those experiments and practices that can help gratitude seep into not just an individual's life, but a family's life as well. Into our relationships with our parents and our children, and yeah. And again, it's got all of the exercises and questions to hopefully create a sort of process of transformation as one reads through the book. So it's not just conceptual knowledge or ideas, but it actually creates the direct experience of a grateful heart, and softening into our human experience.
It's interesting because often working in ceremonies, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast a couple times, but there's two words, and they almost inevitably go together. And usually at the end, when someone is sharing, and when they say those two words, I have this very deep, like, felt sense, this very deep knowing that the medicine and they themselves have come together, and it's worked in a way. And those two words are gratitude and humility. And when someone expresses that, there's just, I mean, you can see it on them. There's this peace, there's this joy, not in some, ostentatious way. There's just this very deep felt sense. And it was interesting because it also reminded me when I was younger, I was seeing this girl, and I think I just got back from kind of traveling around the world for 2 years, also in this search of all of these things. And she was very fascinated by that. And she turned to me and, and she said, yeah, that's amazing. I think I can find all of that in my garden. And I was like, you're probably correct. But kind of this idea that there's all of this wisdom where we are, and then that reminded me of I was sitting one day with my grandmother, and she's 94 now, and this was a few years ago, and she was saying, Jason, I every day when I wake up, the first thing I do is that I just I lay there for a minute, and I just look around the room, and I just find one thing that I can be grateful for, and I focus on that, and that's how I start my day. And I was also thinking, like, in a way, like, man, I've been traveling the world for all of this wisdom, and like, here it is right here with my grandmother. But that idea, and like, there's something also, I think, in our culture which we very much have this reverence for youth and people who speak a lot, and I think we've gotten very far removed from that very tangible wisdom. Like, here's a woman who's 94 years old, like, something she's been doing is right. Like, she's had hardships, it's not that she's free of trauma or she's had the easiest life. And here's this thing of what she's saying, like how she starts her day. And even in her, like when I was younger, like there was times where I saw anger, I saw jealousy, I saw, these heavier emotions, but now I look at her today and there's just this like sense of contentment, this sense of peace, of like I've lived a good life, like things are good, and there's this joy. But this idea, of going back to gratitude, like that's how she starts her day. And going back to the plant work, for me, when I see that in someone, like there's this very deep sense of knowing that this person is connected. So why do you, you're saying like, obviously this is such a powerful thing. There's even science now behind it showing. Why do you think that's so powerful, and why do you think like gratitude of all things is such an important practice to do? And because it's also interesting, because you said for you in your journey it was this part of this remedy for your depression. And I think depression is something that so many people are dealing with right now. I don't know if pandemic is the right word, but it's global, and not just in the West, but all over the place. And it's something that seemingly, as you were saying, like the more we do, or the more we try and know or conquer, there's also this sense of like this creeping depression which is coming into people. And it's something, you know obviously it's somewhat skewed in the work I do, because people are at a point where they're having to deal with this, but it just seems like something that's very, very prevalent all over the world right now. So why is that one thing which seemingly seems very simple? And I think when a lot of people hear that, they're like, oh well, yeah, that makes sense. But there's not, again, not like that inherent embodying it. There's not that practice of it. So why is that so important? And then also, uh, are there maybe some simple tools that people can do to really embody that?
Mm. Yeah, so for me, gratitude and humility are two fundamental truths. We are talking about truth. And I recall writing an essay in my late teens, and it was titled "Why I Will Be Humble One Day." And essentially, it recognized that I was arrogant and opinionated and self-righteous at times, and yet my ignorance is vast. If I know anything, then it's clear that what I don't know is far more vast and significant. So why would I possibly? The only true position is one of humility, and I was sort of hopeful that I would become more humble as life unfolded, and life in its wisdom. And be careful what you wish for, right? But certainly, I found depression and addiction and brain tumor to be humbling experiences, and the brain tumor diagnosis was like, oh, you got me, sort of thing. It was far from far from poor me or anything like that. It was okay. And gratitude, similarly, everything's a gift. Everything's given. This body, this breath, this awareness, this world. It's all a gift. And so to activate that thankfulness for this experience, for everything, it is an aligning with truth. As John not John, William Blake stated that gratitude is heaven itself. So he is equating the unitive state of consciousness, or God realization, with gratitude as being a means into that. I would say the same, that gratitude is a consequence of non-dual awareness, and it's also a cause, potentially, of a moment of non-dual awareness as well. So it can be useful in this way. The practices, I love to ask my partner as we're going to sleep, what was the best things that happened today? What did you enjoy most about today? And of course, your grandmother offered a great one to start the day in a similar way. Like, what am I grateful for right now? And that could be, what am I grateful for about what's happening today? Or it could just be, grateful to have a warm bed, or I'm grateful to see the trees as I wake up. There is a very nice embodiment practice, which is to open the arms as we're doing this. So we're creating this sort of physiological anchoring, and we're creating a very literal opening of the subtle energy system and the blood flow as well. So it's a very powerful physiological and psychological intervention to open our chest, to open our arms. It's the Christ pose, rather interestingly as well, which is the pose that I ran out into the lagoon and took after vitamin DMT. So it does seem there's something in these medicines that brings us some of these wisdoms. So that can be a beautiful one, to jump out of bed and to open the arms and to feel whatever there is to feel today, right? That might be a delightful expansiveness or joy, or it might be a tightness or a heaviness, who knows? But to embrace whatever it is each morning. So journaling morning and evening is the gold standard. Writing out in the present tense, I am grateful for, I am experiencing gratitude for, I'm feeling grateful for. Because when we engage our motor function circuits of the brain, so when we're utilizing our body, our writing, our spatial awareness as well, we're creating a more full neurological engagement. So whilst singing or speaking is great, it's the research indicates that if we're writing that down, it's actually more engaging. It's a more meaningful and more fully embodied experience than if we're just thinking or speaking. So topping and tailing the day, writing 3 things in the present tense is the gold standard, and quite easy, 2 minutes in the morning, 2 minutes in the evening. Can be literally, we give ourselves 7 minutes in the morning, 7 minutes at night to complete our gratitude, stretching, and meditation practice. Could be we just take, might be we need to do a bit of practice to get to a point where 2 minutes is enough in stretching to be meaningful for the body. But that when we've got that familiarity with our body and how our system works, we know what's going to be the high leverage stuff, what's going to be most beneficial. And for me, gratitude's up there with meditation, drinking plenty of clean, clear water, and stretching the body and experiencing connection. Whether that's here now with you in this exchange, or with my partner, or with my family, or with the trees, or or with presence, with God, we might say.
So all of these different practices you've done, because you've had a deep curiosity in these different spiritual practices, Zen Buddhism, and drinking plants, and Vipassana. Do you have a sense, because you mentioned a few times this idea of unity, and so do you have a sense of like the union between all of these, like what they're getting at, what they're, because I think in a way for these practices to have survived for so long, I mean, things are so fleeting. I remember watching the Oscars a number of years ago, and I had this deep reverence for Marlon Brando, because for me he was the guy who changed acting. Like there was like Marlon Brando, or there was acting pre Marlon Brando and there was acting post Marlon Brando. Like you watch him in A Streetcar Named Desire, and it's just like he pops off the screen, and everyone else seems like they're acting. It seems very phony in a way. And he was the inspiration of all of these other people who really revolutionized acting: Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Harvey Keitel. And these guys, like, for them Marlon Brando was the greatest. And I remember watching the Oscars the year he died, and they do this like in memoriam thing, and so they were listing all the people who died, and then the last one was Marlon Brando. And I was thinking, it was going to be this 15-minute thing where they give him all this respect, and it was basically like 5 seconds. Marlon Brando, born in this year, died in this year, and then everyone starts clapping, and then the award show goes on. And I just remember thinking, like, my God, like that was the guy, and that's it. Like he's done now, but just in that sense of like the fleeting nature of everything. And yet these practices have survived the test of time, which I think very few things which have a deep meaning are able to bypass that fleeting nature. Like there's something in them that humans have found. They've found a deep truth or a deep wisdom, and they've decided to pass these things on. So I know this is a big question, but do you see the commonality, and why they're important, and what they're potentially pointing towards?
So people have done a very good job of demonstrating the universality and the commonality of various methods of transformation and tools of spiritual inquiry. Aldous Huxley wrote The Perennial Philosophy, and there's a sort of two schools. One says that what is being reported is the same. So, I might call it moksha, he might call it nirvikalpa samadhi, they may call it a kensho, they may call it a satori, but it's the same terrain that's being described. They have different maps, but it's the same terrain that's being described. Others would argue, no. Nirvikalpa samadhi is completely different from satori. It's an objectively different ontology, arrived at through a different process of training. And Ken Wilber's obviously done a great job with integral theory of providing a meta theory through which all these different theories emerge. I think he's done a great job. So I think there's clearly commonality and universality, it seems to me. It seems that we enjoy. There's a value in peace. There's a quality in to be in a good feeling body, and that value is not just for me, but it's for the society, for the community as well. So if I'm able to experience anger or frustration or irritation without acting it out, then that's really good for my family or for my culture, for my community. If I can have a profound insight, if I can be right, but not have to be right, that's something I've learned over the years. My friend pointed out to me, he said, "Will, your need to be right causes other people pain." And so I hopefully have stopped that it's usually far more important to be kind than right. So the art of not being right, even when you're right, is one that I practice, and the art of returning love, returning non-love with love, is the other thing that I practice. And these things are useful. These capacities are useful. So they do, in my view, have a universality, and and I'm struck by the fact that at this time on planet Earth, with all the darkness and the dysfunction and the extent to which we are harming the life systems that we depend upon, and the extent to which we are harming ourselves through our healthcare and so on and so on. We are also living in a time where we have access to all of these traditions and wisdoms and technologies very often in our pocket. Dog Chen, for example, did not used to be articulated to anyone until a very significant process and series of initiations had occurred. Some just for very good practical reasons, ensure that person's nervous system can take this, that person's psychology can hold this. And also because there's a certain sort of preparatory process that each builds and allows us to go into the next. We practice single-mindedness, concentration practice that then allows us to practice diffused awareness. You can't really do one without the other. Now, I think, I'm not speaking from experience, I'm pretty sure you can probably search Dog Chen, probably go into someone's Dog Chen masterclass and probably have some authentic Dog Chen teacher give you the essence of Dog Chen in an American context for $197. We can offer conjecture as to how authentic or how deep that is, but even the fact that you can surface skim that and then go and read Rumi, and then go and practice a fully integrated Western psychology, Zen Buddhism within many different traditions. And then maybe, if still not satisfied, head down to the Temple of the Way of Light. where we might meet all manner of cultures merging and traditions. And I think there's another great example of Temple of the Way of Light, where you've got this extraordinary, rich indigenous practice, and you've got this attempt to bring integration in, and Western psychology in, and neuroscience, and community, and all these different components. So it truly is an extraordinary time to be alive, and it does seem to be set up in the favor of humanity evolving into higher and more functional forms. And I think happily that will happen regardless of how moronic and limited the people that end up leading our corporations and governments are. I think that there is power, evolutionary impulse to that truth that will be the dominant force. But of course, that may include huge suffering and death in the billions. Who knows? Like what? Who knows what a quantum leap for human consciousness will look like? Maybe it's already happened. Maybe we're now on a trajectory with the internet and all these technologies for personal awakening and well-being, particularly when we consider that we're existing within a unified field of consciousness. Each one of us that works through our trauma, that works through our confusion, and comes to the clarity of the purity of our own consciousness. That's a vibration that's offered out into the whole. We know from sort of holographic principles that we are we can be of the whole and containing the whole at the same time. So yeah. Yeah, so I think I just talked myself into a very optimistic human future, which it isn't one that's always conscious in my, I see a lot of unconsciousness and so on in human culture, but yeah, I guess I'm at heart an optimist, and of course, if we accept our role as creative principles within consciousness, within the world of form, then what we imagine and what we believe and feel and think is going to happen is a bit of a vote for that happening.
Well, that seems like a pretty good way to begin to close this down, my friend.
Sure.
I think we're over 3 hours. I had no doubt it would reach
Wow.
that. Can you talk a little bit maybe about the work you do and the podcast and seminars and just kind of where you're at in life right now and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I haven't been doing much face-to-face stuff like most people for obvious reasons. That's been restricted, but I am working with a group of extraordinary people out here creating a Flow Hub, and we offer flow consciousness and flow discovery retreats out in Gippsland. So this is for people that are located in Australia. We're about an hour and a half out of Melbourne. And I'm working as a coach as well. So I'm currently taking on one-on-one clients. So I work as a transformational coach. So I work with people one-on-one. That's something I enjoy immensely and gain a lot of meaning from. And yeah, what does the marketing tell me I should say here? I help cultural creatives turn their biggest pain into purpose and possibility, or something like that. My website's willpie.com, and there's lots of things that people say about me on there that are a bit more authentic. And I'm thinking about writing another book called The Truth. Actually, that's the working title. Since the recurrence, the subtitle has been "What Curing Brain Cancer Taught Me About Life, Love, and Death," or something like that. So I'm imagining a place where I'm writing about an event in the past that is, the resolution of my brain's well-being. And I'm just about to start, although I've been saying this for a while, a group coaching community called Living Impeccably. I ran it for a couple of years and it was glorious. And I'm thinking about relaunching that now. So if anyone's interested in the possibility of working with me one-on-one or in the group coaching capacity, they can reach me at will@willpie.com. The podcast, I haven't done any episodes for a little while. Once I'd had the episode with you, Jason, it was just where to go from there. It was just it all will be downhill. So, so I actually haven't. I'm not sure if I've done episodes since you. Must have done if it was a year ago. But yeah, that's called The Truth Lover, and Empowering Enlightened Humanity is the subtitle. And there's lots of extraordinary people on there, including yourself, of course, Lissa Rankin, and too many beautiful names to mention, but people can find that on the usual places. And loveandtruthparty.org, loveandtruthparty.org is an attempt to create a self-organizing, self-replicating system of awakening and revolution, connecting people with their own spiritual power, their own truth, and inviting them to act in the world from that place of clarity and peace, bringing a spirit of play into our personal and collective unfolding. I would say, along with gratitude and humility, I think a sense of humor is another divine quality. That if we have lost, if we haven't got gratitude, or if we haven't got humility, or we haven't got a sense of humor, then this life is going to be pretty challenging.
Beautiful, my friend. Is there anything that's on your mind we didn't touch on that you'd like to talk about?
I can say pretty confidently no. I think we were pretty thorough. We covered a huge number of things. So thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure chatting with you as always. So I've really enjoyed the opportunities to connect with you and catch up, and hopefully it's useful for your viewers and listeners, and thank you for listening or watching. And be grateful, be humble, and keep a sense of humor.
I forgot one final question, kind of wrapping this to the beginning. Did you fulfill your bucket list?
I have swum with dolphins. I have worked with ayahuasca. And if there's a multi-ethnic group of women listening who just think that they could really serve, help this guy fulfill his bucket list, then by all means, happily there are great dreams and bold desires yet to be fulfilled. So maybe I'm not dead yet.
Yeah, that seems like maybe one of these things that's still left for you to live for. So,
yeah.
Well, great, my friend. It's been a pleasure, and you very much have a beautiful mind, and I think and hope a lot of people will see that and get a lot from this. And there's just a lot of gems, and I hope people, if they're interested, reach out to you, because I think you have a lot to offer and share. And very much as you were saying, I think this kind of evolution of humanity involves people like yourselves, like really speaking from a place of knowledge and truth. And it's vital, especially in these times where it seems like this very strange time where there's this resistance in a way to hearing things. And sometimes the truth and knowledge can be, I don't want to say hurtful, but in a way it can. I don't think truth is ever hurtful.
Only to
But
lies.
yeah, but I think when we have barriers up that are very strong, that often come from that place of a lack of humility, a lack of gratitude, it can very much hit those like a wall. And I think it's so important that people do speak, their truth, and that truth with a capital T too. And because ultimately all of that is for the good. It's for the individual good, it's for the collective good, it's for the higher good. So I thank you, brother. I thank you for continuing to do that, and I wish you all the best. And one of these days, we'll have to do it again, because I feel there's easily another 3 hours we could go on for.
Thank you so much, brother. It's been a real joy and a pleasure. Yeah, to the universe within.
Yeah, absolutely, my friend. Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Jason.
All right, everybody, that is it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with my friend Will. I really enjoyed speaking with him. I always enjoy talking with him. It looks like we went over 3 hours, which wasn't surprising to me at all. And I think we can probably do another 3 at some point. So hopefully we'll be back on to talk about more. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really great option. It's a subscription service. For as little as $1 a month, you can sign up, and even small contributions make a really big difference. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. There's also the ability to directly donate via PayPal. And if you're not able to do that, simply going on the YouTube channel, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, that's a really big help with the algorithms. And then with the audio version, going on Apple Podcasts, subscribing to the show, and leaving a starred rating and a short review. That's a really big help. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for the support. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all on the next one.
Tunga